I missed you guys in the street. But I didn't mind. You didn't mind.
Because
Question, and it's a long answer you can tell me, and I'll go away. You know, if Care we get, we have a 401k and our money just goes directly into my tree. Now, is that because we can't touch it or anything? Do we have to pay, or should we pay?
Zakat
on it?
Yeah, you should.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
You should pay zakat, but with 401k there's a problem, and that is that it's going to be taxed later on.
Right.
So do you pay on the full amount? So the problem is, if you can estimate exactly what your taxes would be, which you can't, but you kind of estimate a minimum amount, and you can deduct the taxes when you're paying the zakat.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we don't.
But you won't know what your tax bracket is until you reach that age. That's the problem with 401k. You can't tell what to deduct, but technically you would be allowed to deduct taxes.
I don't mind, I just want to make sure.
If you pay the full thing, it's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'll do it.
Yeah, it's better. It's sure.
Jazakallah.
Right.
So
Interesting.
Really, huh?
Really interesting.
I would have loved to go to that meeting.
I'll tell you a little bit about it when my microphone starts working.
Okay.
Weather was good. Yeah, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Weather was fine. So, I was in Dallas. Yeah, alhamdulillah. It was interesting. Yeah. Once you get back, you all start speaking fine. Alhamdulillah.
Was that Texas rumor?
Yeah. They're such nice people, actually. They're so friendly, I never noticed before, I never really paid attention. Very hospitable people, mashallah. So, really, I've been to Indiana, and that was very friendly people, yeah. So the class, in fact, so those of you who don't know, I went to Dallas for an Islamic finance conference. So I'm thinking actually of making an optional module for CIS on Islamic finance, like a 10-week class on Islamic finance, or maybe if we can cram it in 5 weeks perhaps. I know you'll be interested in attending that? Okay. It's going to be highly critical, I'm just letting you know that. I'm highly critical of Islamic finance, but I'll teach it anyways, inshallah. So we decided, a few of us at the conference, we're going to start our own Islamic bank here because the other ones are a little bit in the gray area. So inshallah. So hopefully make dua that materializes itself, inshallah. Alright, so continuing. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. So we left off at public interests, right? Where is it? Yes, okay. So we left off at what's called maslaha mursala, or public interest. And from what we taught last week, I decided to teach it a little bit differently. You could just erase what you learned last week, and let's start from scratch. So public interest is this method actually the first part of what you learned was actually fine. I just cut out one little part of it where we left off. So it's a method that's used to arrive at a ruling for a law which is beneficial, which Islamic law has not made any specific rules for. Okay. Welcome back, Azizan, by the way. MashaAllah, I didn't even recognize. So for those of you who know Azizan, alhamdulillah, he had surgery. He's looking great, mashallah. Feeling good? Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So maslaha mursala is basically, look, there's a benefit in society if you make this rule, or this is going to help the society if we have some kind of rule, but Islam didn't say anything about it. The Quran didn't say you should make this rule, and it didn't say the rule is forbidden either. The Sunnah didn't say anything. There is no qiyas or analogy which you can make. Now the thing is, are you allowed to make these rules or not allowed to make these rules? If you're not allowed to make the rule, then you're going to miss this great opportunity for people to benefit in society. And the best example would be like a stop sign or a signal light, right? So you need stop signs in society today. Now the Quran didn't talk anything about stop signs, nor did the Sunnah, nor did analogy, nor did, you can't find it anywhere. So if a Muslim comes and says, hey, well, you know what, this stop sign thing that they're asking me to stop at, it's not binding on me, because I only follow the Quran and the Sunnah and analogy and istihsan and juridical preference. Therefore, I don't have to obey these stop signs. They have no, weight in my eyes. The thing is, no one should make that claim, because you're allowed to make this rule based upon what's called public interest, or maslaha mursala. So basically, it's something that you're allowed to make rules which are going to be for the benefit of the public, or to avert some harm from them, even though they're not mentioned specifically in the Quran or Sunnah, okay, or in the text of Islam. So usually this method, it falls under analogy. So we were covering, if you recall, we were covering effective causes and the types of effective cause. So the illah, we were talking about different types, and we talked about ones which have been taken into consideration, ones which have been specifically, mentioned, taken into consideration, ones which have been closed to consideration, right? You're not allowed to take them into consideration. And then we talked about what's called mursal, the one which has not been taken into consideration. So there may be a benefit in life if you do something, but it's not specifically been mentioned in Islam. So this is what we're talking about, maslaha mursala. And the reason why it wasn't taken into consideration, there's a wisdom behind it. What is the wisdom behind it? Is because there is an infinite number of ways for people to get some kind of benefit in society. There's an infinite number of ways where you can make a rule which is going to help people, right? Because it depends on the time, it depends on the place, it depends on the circumstance. So if there was no room for this, and Islamic law said, hey, whatever has been prescribed in the Quran and the Sunnah and by analogy, those are the only laws you can have. You cannot make any other laws beyond this. Then society would miss out on being able to benefit in so many other ways, right? So if you look at most modern laws, in terms of governmental laws, like let's say in America, or let's say in some other country, most of them, or a lot of them, would be based on maslaha mursala, public interest. Like for example, forbidding cell phone use while driving is based on public interest, right? Forbidding texting while driving, based on public interest. Something about not cutting in line, or whatever these different laws that are there, they're all based on public interest. So they can change with time and place, but they're allowed to be made. Okay. So what's the basis for this? Right? Where does this come in? Right? What's the proof for this being allowed in the first place? Well, if you look at the Quran, when Allah was talking about tayammum, or dry ablution, which we covered before, Allah says in the Quran, Allah does not intend to make your life difficult. So He's talking about if you don't have any water, you're allowed to perform this tayammum, you're allowed to make this dry ablution with some dirt. Why? Because Allah is not trying to make your life difficult for you. Right? The whole point so the thing is, if you have no water, and you have to make wudu, you have to figure out a way to get water no matter what. Your life will be very difficult. So Allah is saying, the point of you making wudu was not to make your life difficult. There was a specific reason. It was to purify you so that you can pray, you could be in a state, refreshed state, spiritual state. So that tells us something specific. It tells us that all the rules in Islam are there for the benefit of the people. They were not made with no reason. They were not made to make your life difficult. So the rules sometimes may be difficult, but they were not intended to make your life difficult. That's not the purpose behind it. Allah did not just give you this rule, you have to pray 5 times a day, so that your life becomes more difficult. That's not the purpose. There's another purpose. Right? So when you understand that, right, then you realize that, look, if there's a benefit in some other law for people, when they practice it, or if you enact this law, then it's going to actually help people. Therefore, if Islam closed the law and says there no other laws can be made, it would make life difficult. That's one of the bases for this, number one. Number two basis is that the companions themselves, they used to institute laws. Now see, if the Prophet, when he was head of state, if he makes a law for the state, it's automatically considered sunnah, right? or binding, or even beyond sunnah, right? So you can't say that he made a new law. But now you look at the companions. The companions, when they make a law, it's something that, it's not the level of being a religious text. So if they're doing it, they must be doing it with some kind of authority. So when the companions were in charge of the Muslim community, and they were in charge of the government, they implemented certain rules based on public interest. So here are some examples. Abu Bakr, for example, may Allah be pleased with him, he compiled the Quran into one volume. Right? in order to help with the preservation and the standardization of the text. So, this is something which the Prophet did not do. He wrote it down, but he did not compile it into one solid volume, bound it and everything. Abu Bakr did that. So this is known as, on what basis can he do something like this? Right? On the basis of public interest. It's for the good of the community. If you do this, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not forbidden, nor did the Prophet tell him to do it. But he did it for the benefit of the community. Another example was printing money. Right? So Muslims later on started printing money. We're going to make our own coins. Right? So that's a benefit of the society. Otherwise, the Prophet, someone could come, you can imagine someone coming and making an argument and saying, hey, in the time of the Prophet, he used to use dirhams and dinars. Right? That was the currency that he used. And the dirhams and dinars were actually coming from either the Roman Empire or the Persian Empire. Right? That was the forms that were being used in terms of the gold coins and exchange. This is, hey, if that was good enough for the Prophet, we should follow the Sunnah of the Prophet and we should use the same kind of coins that he used to use rather than printing our own money. And then the answer to that is very simple, right? He said, look, there's a public interest of Muslims having their own coin without having another empire's, brand and mark on it. So they started printing their own coins, which had, the Shahada on it, La ilaha illallah. They had, different coins. And it's very interesting. These coins actually reached Scandinavia like 1200 years ago. Very interesting. They found recently these Muslim coins were actually all the way in Scandinavia. If you know where Scandinavia is, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, Finland, Iceland, exactly. That region had Muslim coins, and they were the dinars that Muslims were printing. It tells you something that trade with Muslims was all over the place, right? All over the place. Umar was appointed to be the Khalifa. Does anyone remember how he was appointed to be Khalifa? How? Abu Bakr appointed him, right? No elections. He was appointed directly. Right? Now this is based on what? On what basis can Abu Bakr do that? How was Abu Bakr elected? Yeah, he was elected by a group of people, right? So on what basis can he select one person? He consulted, but then he made the decision and he asked, do you guys agree or not? On the basis of public interest. Right? He did it on the basis of maslaha mursala. Umar is the right guy for the job. This is what needs to get done. Umar, he used to go around the marketplace and he used to inspect the traders, merchants, and if any of them was cheating, like for example, some of the merchants, they would take water and they would mix it with their milk, so that you can sell more. So when he found it, right? When he found something like that, the punishment that he prescribed in the marketplace was, I'm going to take all your milk, I'm going to pour it out, and it's just going to be wasted. Now, technically, this might seem like something that's haram. You're taking somebody's property. But from a government perspective, this needs to be done in order to deter thieves. And he used to go and he used to inspect people's, if there was rice or grain or something, and it had rained and the water got in there, he used to put his hand down into the sack and see, hey, is there still some, water, in this thing before you sell the entire sack that's been messed up. So he would penalize people. So that's based on what? There's no penalty in the Sunnah that says you're supposed to do this, or in the Quran or anything. But he did this based on public interest. The land of Iraq was not distributed, but instead they decided to impose a land tax on the people who were conquered in Iraq rather than splitting up the land. On what basis was that done? On the basis of public interest. And Osman, we talked about, he instituted a second azan for the Friday prayers, right, on the basis of public interest. So these are just some examples. Now the thing is, you have to be very cautious when it comes to utilizing what's maslaha mursala or public interest, because it can be misused. It can be misused. So if you want it to be a legitimate concept, it has to follow the following criteria. Condition number 1, it must be a genuine benefit. And a genuine benefit means that it is likely to be realized. It's something that's really going to actually bring benefit, not some random, conjecture that, maybe it'll help people, let's try, something. That's some random thing. It actually has to have a good probability of bringing benefit to people. So let's take some examples. Let's say somebody makes a claim that for the benefit of the Muslim community, we're going to say that divorce can only take place in a court of law. It's not allowed to take place at home or in any other circumstance between husband and wife. Now, some people have argued this point in the past. There have been Muslim scholars who actually tried to argue this point and say, hey, this should be there for the benefit of the community. Now, is there a benefit in it? Yes. Is a clear benefit that's not going to have any harms associated with it? No, not necessarily. A lot of people would argue against that because it can make life very difficult. Because getting a court case or getting a date in court, or maybe the court is backed up or something like that, and you say, this marriage is not working out, or you're going to pronounce a revocable divorce, which you can revoke anyways. So you have to go to the court to pronounce a divorce. Then you have to go to the court to revoke the divorce. Then you have to deal with all these other dealings. Maybe you have to hire a lawyer or whatever the process may be. It will make things very difficult. So there's a benefit in it, but it may make it too difficult in the society. And Islam has given the concession that this doesn't have to be done. So this is an example of something which looks like it would have a benefit, but it wouldn't have a very clear, directed benefit. A better example would be that Muslims must register their marriage in the court or by the government. Now this is something which has a very clear benefit, right? And the harms of doing that are actually very minimal, with the exception of, if you wanted to marry one wife, which obviously, more than one wife, which you're not allowed to do, in this land, obviously you can't register that. But a lot of scholars, like for example here in Southern California, most scholars are clear that we have to set a standard. Anyone who wants to get married has to have it registered with the state. The reason being is because there's so much harm that will occur by not registering your marriage with the state. Like for example, if you have children and then there's divorce, the imam or the masjid, cannot enforce alimony or, helping your children out. If you're going for Hajj, going to perform the pilgrimage, you need proof. Like a woman needs proof that, she's with her mahram or her husband. If there's no proof of that, she won't even be able to go, for example. And in many, many other cases. Because when the government wants to do something, or you want to pay your taxes, or whatever it is, you cannot prove, if you're not legally married, and you just have an Islamic marriage only, there's so many things which you cannot do, and there's so many harms which can accrue from it. So public interest is either about benefiting the community, or averting harm from the community. And that's why in this case, there's a legitimate public interest in our context where marriages should be registered if you're going to be performing the marriage, rather than not registering them and just saying, oh, we just do it at home. There's a lot of harm in that. So that's something that should be considered. Second example. So if the government claims that it's necessary to spy on each and every single citizen without any type of suspicion, they say, well, this is for the public interest. We're trying to protect, people from harm, something like that, like what's being argued right now by the NSA and Obama and everyone else. Is this a clear benefit? Definitely.
NSA is learning about Islam.
So there is a small benefit. The NSA will learn something about Islam, perhaps, by tapping, the lines of everyone of Muslims. But at the same time, they probably already went to sleep by now in this class. So, but it's not that beneficial. It's not that beneficial, and there's a lot of harm that can result from it. So this is something that would be an exaggerated claim. So it's not something that would serve a public interest. Another example is refusing to acknowledge marriages which are undocumented. right, if one of the spouses is denying the marriage. This is a kind of theoretical scenario. If somebody comes to us, let's say myself, Sheikh Faqih, and saying, hey, I want you to deal, we're married and we want you to, deal with this case. I want you to make him pay, child, alimony or something like that. And let's say you have 100 cases waiting for you. And they say, okay, well, where is your proof of marriage? And the guy says, I never married her. We never had we never had a relationship. The woman is lying. So now, what are you going to do in terms of, will you take this case, will you take it into account that the couple is married, or you won't? How can you prove it? You can't prove it. Therefore, this is something where you would want to refuse undocumented marriages. So you should force people, by making a law, that they need to document their marriages before taking place. Another example would be dowry, for example, or the dower, the mahar. Right? Mahar should be documented somewhere. Because if it's simply verbal, and then all of a sudden the person who performed the marriage is being asked to testify in court, this man promised me he's going to give me this much money and now he's not giving me the money. How is the person supposed to remember exactly, and where do you prove it or something? So these things need to be documented in order to protect the woman so that she actually gets her proper mahar or her dowry that she was supposed to get. So this could be a maslaha mursala, especially in this day and age where things are documented, and that's the only way you can know about these things, right? Because you don't have a family and you don't have a tribal society to make sure that these things are taking place. Another example, to prevent untrained doctors and lawyers from practicing medicine or law. That actually is something which happens, for example, in this country, and it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing, because that will prevent a bunch of fraudulent people from going and ripping off, or pretending that they're medical, doctors or whatever it may be, and it can cause a great harm to society. So depending on the level of limitation, that could be a genuine public interest. The last example is a really good example, actually. Detaining a suspect for a period of time while investigating the person's case. Let's say there's a person accused of a crime. Okay, the police department takes the person in. Now, are they allowed to detain the suspect for a small amount of time? They should be, based on public interest. Because if you don't detain them while you're investigating, what's going to happen if they did commit the crime? They're going to run away. They're just going to be gone, right? It will be so easy to just run away until, now the thing is, Islamically, you're not supposed to detain a person until they've been proven guilty. But in this case, there's a genuine public interest where you're not going to imprison them, you're not going to declare them guilty, but you need to detain them for a certain amount of time, right? Not like what's happening today, but like in a certain amount of time where a legitimate investigation is going to take place to see whether this really happened or not. Right, so that's something which would be a public interest benefit for people. So first condition is it has to actually provide a real benefit. Okay, not some random maybe it could have some benefit, right? Like if we spy on each and every single person, maybe we're going to catch one. Or if we go and we strip search every single passenger on every single flight, perhaps we can uncover one person. That's not a legitimate benefit that's coming out. So that's number one. Number two is that it must benefit the community as a whole, the general community, and not one individual or one small group of people. So that's very important because it would prevent small elite groups from taking advantage of the idea of public interest and making a bunch of laws for themselves. Like, for example, special tax breaks for the wealthy, or special voting rights for wealthy people. Right? So you get to, since you have, in fact, they're actually considering this now. One of the CEOs of some company just said, hey, wealthy people, they should be entitled to more than one vote since they're wealthy. So their vote should count, several amount of times. And if you look at how foolish some of these billionaires really are, they should be getting like half a vote. So the thing is, this is not a real legitimate benefit for the entire community. It'll be for a small specific group of people, and that's not allowed. That's two. And number three, condition number three is, obviously, it cannot violate a rule in Islamic law, clearly. A clear-cut rule with its principle in Islamic law, it cannot violate that. So take an example. And we saw many examples already. Remember we said that there are certain effective causes which are suitable, but they are invalidated, or they're mulgha, invalidated from consideration, or close to consideration. So we saw that. So we saw quite a few examples. Let's take a few more examples, to refresh your memory. So, red wine, for example. Red wine has alleged health benefits for the kidneys or something like that? Liver, for a liver or something like that. There's antioxidants in there or something like that. So, you have this alleged health benefit that's there in red wine. And the Quran has clearly prohibited any type of intoxicants, even in small quantities. And the Quran actually said that there's some benefit in wine, that the harm outweighs the benefit. So in this case, it's clearly prohibited despite the fact that it could bring perhaps some amount of benefit, but it's prohibited by established Islamic law, therefore it cannot be overruled because of the public interest. Right? Another example, someone who is acutely depressed. Right? And you're saying, you know what? If we allow him to smoke marijuana, smoke weed, right, this person can relieve or ease some of their depression. And the thing is, obviously, it's an intoxicant, so that they'll feel better, but it's an intoxicant, and that's been clearly prohibited in Islam. And there are so many other ways to deal with depression. So this is not something that is required on acute depression. And C, third example, is microfinancing loans for the poor. This is a great example, because the one who invented microfinancing loans, he was Bangladeshi, right? So he invented these loans. He got so many awards and honors and prizes and all of that. He said, look, the people are helping the poor, and this is a great way of helping the poor. And microfinancing loans basically means you're giving a loan to a person who's in need without doing some super credit background history check, but you're giving a very, very small rate of interest to them. But there's still a rate of interest, right? So that they have to pay it back with some interest. But the thing is, Islam has prohibited interest completely. Riba is completely prohibited, even in the smallest amounts. Right? So if you want to give a loan to someone, you give a loan, right, without interest. Or you figure out another way to invest with them into the property. Right? But here, you say, well, microfinancing loans, they're the new big thing. Everyone is saying they're good for the poor. It helps eliminate poverty from a certain region. There is some benefit in it, but at the same time, it's prohibited in Islamic law. And of course, there are much better alternatives out there. So therefore, even though you say there's a maslahah, okay, at the same time, it's not going to be allowed because it violates a clear rule in Islam. Okay, so this is public interest. Any questions on public interest? Yes.
The first thing has to do with when you mentioned the examples of Quran being compiled, etc. So how does that kind of go with people who literally say, just that, like to invent something, why don't they do that one?
People who like to say bid'ah for everything. Yeah.
There is some feel like they will get to that, and it's like people. So why don't they consider this?
Oh, why don't they consider this bid'ah? So why don't they consider this an innovation, but they say it about other things? Probably, perhaps one of the reasons is that the general rule is when it comes to acts of worship, right? You cannot invent, there's no real public interest in an act of worship, right? So you don't come up with new rules. So maybe they're critiquing acts of worship when people are doing something like that. That could be a reason. Otherwise, if they're saying everything else is innovation and certain things they say and certain things they don't, it's just they're ignorant and they need to be taught. I mean, I don't know what else to say about them. So, Allah knows best. Yeah.
Basically, the laws that come under this section here, they're more original laws, or are they before?
What do you mean?
Well, it's, public interest. Public interest in California may not be the same public interest.
Oh yeah. So public interest varies with location. So it's a regional thing. It's not for the entire ummah. not for the entire Muslim. It's regional. In that region, it's needed for that group of people. It's relative, yes, absolutely, it's relative.
Okay, and this may not be exactly public interest question, but like you said, a very valid example, which I know is fresh in your mind from the text of the question. How do you deal with microfinancing, whatever the last example was, when you have an inflation versus that?
And then we'll leave that question to another class.
Yeah, based on this question, like if it's a regional thing, let's say Texas, California. I say that California just implemented a public interest, that it's really working out well. I don't need to make them borrow it and implement it over there for the benefit of the.
Oh yeah, if you see that there's a public interest in another region, you can implement it here as well. Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, yes. Okay, so microfinancing is basically a way of giving a loan to poor people with a small amount of interest rather than the large normal amount of interest. And they say that they're helping the poor people that way. Especially in the cottage industry? Yeah. Yeah. Like sewing and textiles and all of that. So even farmers are getting a lot of these loans and everything. So this microfinance, this is what's known as microfinancing. It's a new trend, and the reason why it's a new trend is because before that, no one was really helping. The banks would not help the poor, right? So this is a way to get some banks to help the poor. And of course, they're going to benefit. Now, what they claim is they're giving such a small level of interest only to make sure that they put pressure on them to pay it back so that they're responsible. But at the same time, I don't want to get into detail, at the same time, if someone has a loan on them, regardless of whether it's a small amount or a large amount or whatever, there's going to be pressure to pay it back anyways, right? Because there's going to be collateral you have to put up. They can come and they can claim some of your property in case you default in the loan, whether or not there's interest, right? So it doesn't make any difference. See, the one thing about loans is, this is not about loans between individuals. These are loans which are recognized by the government. So if you're not able to pay, we can claim your property. We can take your house. We can take your farm. We can take your sewing machine, for example. So there's already a guarantee. That's why riba is prohibited in Islam. Because you're guaranteeing an extra added benefit on top of the loan that you're giving in exchange for what? What did you do to deserve that extra benefit? Nothing. That's the problem.
What do you say about the rich stuff? Like, money for NPL, and or home or something, what is that? Like, even a dollar or
yeah, it's a good question, but it's for another class, inshallah. We'll cover it in Islamic finance.
Another thing to really understand microfinancing is where I tell my friends, like when they offer me something to eat, like some type of that it has like 0.001% of pork. I mean, it's very minimal still, it's already roughly that.
Right, so we don't take any interest, right? Alright, so the next thing is blocking the means. The next method is blocking the means. It's known as sadd al-zari'a. Okay, sadd means blocking, zari'a is the means, or wasila. So this is a method used in Islamic law, very similar to public interest. And basically it means that you block the means to an evil, some harm in society that's going to be there. So it's like the opposite of public interest. Rather than putting a law in place which is going to bring some benefit or prevent something from happening, this is going to be a blocking law which stops you from doing something in particular. So there's kind of an overlap between public interest and sadd al-zari'a, blocking the means. So this usually occurs when a lawful means, meaning a halal action, is expected to lead to an unlawful end or a haram end. So something is halal and it's expected that this probably could lead to something haram. We're going to say that the halal is even haram in this case. That's exactly what blocking the means is. So you obstruct it so that it doesn't take place. So let's take an example. that Islam has already made in the first place. So Islam has many rules that which does this. For example, it's forbidden for a man and a woman to be alone in seclusion together when they are non-mahram, which means that they can potentially be married. They're not close relatives, so they can be married. They're not allowed to be alone in seclusion physically in a room together. Right? Now the reason for that, it's not because being physically near to each other is prohibited. That's not the reason. Because if that was the reason, then if you put a third or a fourth person there and they happen to be together, right, there's nothing wrong with that. Right? So it's the reason for the prohibition is not because there's something wrong with them being in the same room together. But the reason for the prohibition is a means to block adultery and fornication from taking place. Right? So you cannot get into adultery or fornication without the first step of being alone. Right? So what it did was it blocked that, says, you know what, you're not even allowed to be alone together in that room in order to prevent anything like this from happening. Right? So that's usually the first step. Another example is drinking a sip of beer or a sip of wine or taking one puff of marijuana or a drug or something like that. That can generally not intoxicate you. One sip of beer is generally not going to intoxicate anyone, right? But it's prohibited. Why? Because it's blocking the means to intoxication. Now, if you block the means, if you're not allowed to take a sip, you can never get intoxicated through beer, right? So by blocking it, it prevents it from taking place. So the thing is, if someone comes and makes an argument and says, well, I can take a sip, and all my friends, we can take one sip and we can stop. We can stop ourselves, we can control ourselves. Right? The thing is, even if you can, and let's say 50% of people can, let's say 95% of people can, right? Islam still wanted to block that 5%. Or even that 1% because of how dangerous it is. So when it was making the rules and it was making the laws, it wasn't taking into consideration that 100% of people will fall into it, nor does it take into consideration that the majority, 51% of people will fall into it, depending on what is being prohibited and what is being blocked and how dangerous it really is, regardless of whether it materializes in 100 out of 100 people, how many people it materializes in, it's still blocked due to the harming nature of this thing. So that's something to keep in mind. A lot of people make that argument otherwise. The companions, they used to practice this principle of enacting certain laws to block means for public interest. Right? So to give you an example, during the time of the companions, there was a woman who was divorced by her husband when he was in his final illness, meaning in the illness where he ended up dying. Right? So he was on his deathbed and he ended up dying. Now we covered this in inheritance before. Right? So what is the rule, if anyone recalls, what is the rule that if a man divorces his wife during his final illness, what is the rule with regards to inheritance? She still gets it. Is she still married? Not necessarily married, but she still gets inheritance. Right? So she's still in that sense, right? She's still entitled to inheritance. Why? Because it's very likely that the man was trying to exclude her from inheritance. Why would you live with someone for 30 years? Everything's going fine, and just at the last illness, you would divorce her. What would be the reason for that? When you know you're about to die, doctors are telling you only have a few days left, you divorce your wife. Why would you do that? It's very likely that you did it in order to block her from inheritance, but your kids could get more money or so, whatever other weird reason you have. So the companion said, hey, this is wrong, and this should not be tolerated, therefore we're going to entitle her to inheritance still, and they used the principle of blocking the means. And what are they blocking exactly? They're not just blocking divorce, but they're blocking, avoiding inheritance to the wife, right, during that time. So that's one example. Now there are many different types of ways to practice this blocking the means. So the likelihood of something leading to something that's prohibited is different, right? So how can you tell whether you implement a rule to block something? How do you know it's likely to happen or not likely to happen? So there's 4 categories, okay? The first category is a means which will almost definitely lead to some type of evil or some type of harm. I'll give you an example. Someone goes and digs a hole in a public area. A better example, someone goes and puts, what are those things called? Puts caltrops. Anyone remember from history what a caltrop is? Those thorny metal things. Right? You put some of those on the freeway. Right? Now it's almost for sure this is going to lead to some harm because there's cars going down the freeway all the time. Right? So one of the cars is going to hit it, bust its tire, and spin out of control or something like that. It's almost certain, right, that something's going to happen. So in this case, when it's almost sure that something's going to happen, this means must be prohibited. Now if someone says, hey man, it's my free right to throw, let's say they have garbage which consists of thorns and stuff. It's my right to throw garbage where I feel like it or whatever it is. No, this has to be prohibited in society because it's clearly going to lead to a harm. Someone, let's say, is digging a hole. I'm just digging a hole in some area. It happens to be a public pathway and it's nighttime and there's no lights in that area and people are walking. Obviously, you're going to fall into the hole. Someone's going to fall into the hole. So therefore, it has to be prohibited. Second is that when the means is very likely, it's not almost certain, but it's very likely to result in some kind of evil. So for example, selling weapons to a tyrant, right? Or selling landmines to the Russians, right? Which America does, or America did in Afghanistan. Or, Raytheon and Boeing and all the weapons that are being produced, when you go and you sell it to someone who's going to be utilizing it in a wrong way, going and selling it in the Congo or in different places where there is a conflict taking place, and you know that the person is a tyrant or on the wrong side or not an unjust person, that's very likely to lead to evil. Right? Not 100% sure. They may use them, they may not use them, but it's very likely. Giving, let's say, prescription drugs to a drug addict, for example. Someone's addicted and you sell Valium or you sell some other stuff that kind of makes them feel good or whatever, you know that they're going to be utilizing it most probably in the wrong way. Therefore, you want to prevent that from happening by doing prescriptions on certain drugs or whatever it is. So this should be prohibited in most cases. Okay? Then there's a third category where the means will frequently lead to an evil. Right? So it will happen quite often. Not always it's going to happen. It's not that likely. But it's pretty likely. So let's give an example. Now this is a little bit tricky example to understand, so you have to pay attention. So if there is a sale that's been structured in a certain way that it's going to lead or it's going to amount to getting interest, then there's a difference of opinion on whether it should be prohibited or not. And this is the whole thing about Islamic finance. A lot of Islamic finance today revolves around an example like this. So imagine someone in society says, hey, I want to, if you loan me $9 right now, I'll pay you $10 in a month. You say, you can't do that. That's interest, and interest is prohibited. Okay, I tell you what, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to sell you my water bottle here. Okay, I'm going to sell you my water bottle for $10. On deferred payment of 1 month. So I'm going to pay you after 1 month. Is that fine? Okay, no problem. You're allowed to do that Islamically. Am I allowed to sell this water bottle to somebody for $10, but I tell them I'm going to pay you after a month? It's allowed or not allowed? It's allowed. So say, okay, good. Transaction done. Okay, I owe you $10. And now, hey, that's a nice water bottle, man. Can I buy that from you for $9? Right now, I'll give you cash right now. I'll give you $9. You say, okay, it's a good deal. Okay, give me $9, I take my water bottle back. So I just paid the guy $9, and now I owe the guy what? Huh?
He owes you one.
Sorry, he owes me what? Not $1. Paid cash. Huh?
He owes you
$10. So in essence, what have you just done? You've exchanged 9 for $10, which is the definition of riba as interest. You just figured out another way to do it by using a commodity in place of the interest. So the thing is this, okay? The thing is, Islamically, if you look at these two transactions as separate transactions, they're both halal, right? So if somebody says, hey, it's like a salad, right? If you put tomatoes in the salad, and the tomatoes are halal, and you put some, broccoli in the salad, and the broccoli is halal, how can you put all the stuff in the salad? Everything is halal, throw it into the salad, and you say you're going to become haram? You mix a bunch of halal stuff together, it should be halal. But in this case, it's not. It's not, depending on your intention. So this is what happened. So Imam Malik said that this needs to be forbidden in society on the basis of, what are we calling this? Blocking the means. Right? On the basis of Sadd al-Zari'ah, we need to block the means, because the only type of person who would really be doing this transaction is someone who is trying to figure out a way, a scheme, right, to engage in riba, in interest, without getting caught or calling it interest. Now Imam Shafi'i took a different position, and he said, look, Allah is going to judge people by their intentions. And you don't know if this person really intended that maybe they just made a really dumb transaction. They just weren't thinking. The guy really sold it, and then all of a sudden he changed his mind. He really wanted it back. The guy was not willing to cancel. He's not going to be held accountable in front of Allah if that was his real intention, was to actually not engage in interest, but he happened to make this transaction. So you don't look at them together. You look at them as two separate transactions. You cannot judge a person's intention. If his intention was to engage in interest, he's going to be held accountable in front of Allah. Imam Malik said, interest is not only between you and Allah. Interest messes up the society, and we need to block the means of anyone to be engaging in interest. Otherwise, anyone can make a bunch of contracts like this and everyone can engage in interest. I mean, you probably didn't know about this technique. Now that you know, if you had the intention of engaging in interest, you could do it. If it was claimed to be halal, right? If someone had a bad intention, but the government says you're not allowed to engage in interest, now you just figure out a way to do it. It would be a piece of cake to do it. So Imam Malik says we need to block the means to something like this. Okay? And I agree with Imam Malik on this one. Number 4 is that when there's a means that's rarely expected to result in evil. Right? So let's say someone says, hey, we need to stop, you know what, there's a guy in the Muslim community, he's growing grapes in his backyard. This is so dangerous. We need to stop him because he might take the grapes and make it into wine. And we need to prevent all Muslims from growing grapes because they could potentially make it into wine. In fact, you can even make dates, into nabidh, which is a type of intoxicating beverage. We need to prevent all of these means, right? Because we don't want any alcohol in our society at all. Now, this is a means that's rarely going to result in this because most people eat grapes, right? Most people eat dates. They don't make them into alcoholic beverages, right? So now, if someone has like a marijuana plant growing in their backyard, that's another thing, right? Because generally you're not using it for some other kind of, non-intoxicating purpose. So this type of thing should not be outlawed, and you should not use blocking the means, because if you use this excessively in society, it's going to make a big burden on people. That's why people who overdo it a little bit. And when you hear about very conservative societies, or especially when there's criticism of this country or that is so-called Islamic government or whatever it is, sometimes you say, well, they forbid everything. Because they're thinking along the lines of, we need to block the means to everything. When you block the means a little bit too much, then it becomes a big burden on society. Like, for example, Saudi Arabia is a perfect example, right? So they say the women should not drive. One, that's their culture, and the reason behind it is that, we need to block the means and to protect the women and their safety. They shouldn't be allowed to drive. Right? Now you can see that, look, how likely is driving going to result in evil into that kind of society, for example? It's not that likely. So when it's rarely going to result in the type of, just the driving itself is not going to really cause the evil. You should not be blocking the means to that extent. It's not a good, reason to block it. So anyways, so this, obviously, blocking the means also varies with time, place, and with context. It's relative. Okay? Any questions about blocking the means? No? Good. Okay, so moving on to the next method. That is custom, or urf. Okay? So custom basically refers to people's culture, or what they're accustomed to, in their actions, in the way that they speak. And technically, this is actually, it could fall under the category of public interest, in terms of categorizing what methods we use. So what does this mean? This is a method in Islamic law where you take the custom of a certain locality into consideration when you're determining what the ruling of a certain thing is. Okay? So, let's take an example. And we've seen several examples actually in Islamic law too, but you didn't realize that they were custom examples. The actual proof of it was from custom, but you probably didn't realize it because we didn't discuss it in detail. And now you're going to see it. So when you're selling something, let's say you're selling a computer. In most societies, when you sell a computer, it's custom that when you sell a desktop computer, it's going to be coming with the mouse and the keyboard. Right? Sometimes the monitor, but depending. So if you live in a place where the mouse and the keyboard comes with the computer, right, then if there's a dispute and you've already sold it, let's say you ordered online, you received the product and everything, and they say there's no keyboard, there's no more, how am I supposed to use this computer? If the custom of that region is that it's supposed to be included, it must be included. So the Muslim judge will decide and say, hey, you need to provide a keyboard and mouse, otherwise the sale is invalid, you return the product back. So if you go to another locality where they sell computers without the keyboard and without the mouse, then in that case, custom will take precedence in the fact that that sale works just fine. No one can complain and say, hey, I thought I was getting a keyboard. That's not the way things work around here. You're in a different region, right? You're in Silicon Valley now, this is the way we sell computers, or something like that, right? So, that's custom. So this is actually a very good rule because it allows flexibility and it allows freedom of people to maintain their own culture while following Islam. So there is certain room for maintaining certain cultural practices while being a Muslim, and that culture is taken into consideration. Alright, so custom is very, very common in Islamic law. So, for example, in many societies, when they exchange goods, when they're buying and selling, they don't use words all the time. And if you remember in Islamic law, in the previous class, we said that the condition for a valid sale in Islam is that you have to have a verbal offer and you have to have a verbal acceptance. Right? There has to be an offer and there has to be an acceptance, and it's supposed to be verbally. But the exception is, if the custom or the culture in that community is that this is the way in which you indicate an offer, and this is the way in which you indicate a sale, then that's going to be valid in Islamic law. Even though the hadith, right, of the Prophet, peace be upon him, specifically talks about saying the offer and saying the acceptance, this is going to be valid. So for example, a lot of people, they shake hands. Right? So when they're negotiating, they're bargaining back and forth, and all of a sudden say $10, no $7, no $8. You don't even say okay. You just shake the person's hand. It means the deal is concluded. The sale has taken place. Now if that sale takes place, the person takes the product, walks away, changes his mind, comes back, and the guy had stipulated, hey, no returns. Right? The guy comes back after 2 minutes, Say, hey, you know what? I don't want this anymore. Say, hey, well, you bought it. No, I didn't buy it. I did not verbally, give my acceptance. I shook your hand. Say, yeah, you shook my hand. No, I was just shaking your hand, just trying to be a nice guy. I wasn't shaking your hand meaning this. No, the custom prevails in this case. So if the custom means shaking the hand after negotiation means that you bought it, you can't come and tell the Muslim, guy, say, hey, this guy, he took my product. I just shook his hand, but I didn't mean for this to happen. That's the custom. Custom takes precedence. Same thing in today's supermarkets, right? What is the custom for the offer? How does a supermarket offer its products? Is there a verbal offer? No. Price tags, right? And if there's no price tag, at least there's a barcode or something like that, right? So it's going to be scanned, it's going to give you the price. That's their offer. The fact that it's on the shelf in a store means that that stands for their verbal offer, right? What is the acceptance from the customer? Yeah, you put it in your cart, you get scanned, get bagged, you swipe your credit card or whatever it is, and the process payment. You didn't say a word. All you said was hello, good morning, and everything. How are you doing today? I'm doing fine. Thank you very much. You didn't say, I would like to buy this cereal. You said, I have accepted your offer for the cereal, and I would like to buy this gum, and I have accepted your offer for the gum. There's no need for that verbal. So custom takes precedence. So these things can be known through analogy. You could have figured them out through analogy as well, but what custom does is it takes a qiyas, or it takes an analogy, and it elevates it as a proof, an epistemological proof in terms of how strong it really is. Because an analogy can be zanni, right, which means probable. But this elevates the proof of the analogy to being a higher level. Okay, because if you can tell that this is the culture of the region. Now, resorting to, so these are actions that we saw, right? Actions of trading like handshakes and all of that. Also, there is speech in custom. Right? In people's culture, they use speech in a different way. And in fact, the custom is so strong that even it can override the way that the Quran has used a certain word. So I'm going to give you some examples. So let's say somebody invites some people over to their house and says, you know what? And the person says, I don't like meat. You say, you don't like meat? Okay. They say, I don't want to come to your house. You say, come on, we really want you to come. Say, well, I don't like to eat all of this meat. Say, okay, I promise, I swear by Allah, I'm not going to serve any meat at my dinner. Say, okay, fine. The whole family is coming. Everyone comes. And all of a sudden, they made fish. He said, I told you that I don't want any meat. The guy says, fish is not meat. He says, of course fish is meat. And he starts quoting the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran about fish, it mentions it, lahman tariya. It uses the word lahm, which means meat. It's the same word that's used for animal meat. Cow meat and camel meat and everything. So the word lahm is here, the word lahm is here, meat and meat. Allah used in the Quran the word meat for the flesh of fish and for the flesh of, cattle and all of the other animals. So there's proof. So you broke your promise. Now what do you have to do when you break a promise? Yeah, what is the kafara? We forgot already? Huh? Fasting 3 days is if you can't do the other ones. Feed 10 people, or clothe 10 people, or free 10 slaves? Man, that's expensive. Free 1 slave. Free 1 slave, feed 10 people, clothe 10 people. The guy says, hey, you got to do it now. You say, no, but fish is not, in our culture, fish is not considered meat. So when I use the word meat, our culture, meat means like, cow, chicken, camel. It doesn't mean fish. So the thing is, if the culture dictates that meat in your culture does not include fish, even if the Quran uses the word meat for fish, your culture overrides the usage of the Quran, because that's what you had intended. So it's a very strong proof. Custom is a very strong proof.
Alright, so, and you probably don't want to be inviting that guy again anyways, if he's that hardcore on the thing. But anyways, give you another example. Another example is the word walad in the Quran can refer to male or female child. It can be a male child, it can be a female child. Now if somebody, uses this word for whatever reason, and they use the word walad to indicate a male child only, and that was their intention, and that's the custom of the land, even in Arabic, today in most Arab cultures, when you say walad, it means a boy. It doesn't mean a young boy or a young girl. It primarily means boy, even though the Quran used it in a different context. Right? So in this case, the custom would take precedence first. It would take precedence over the word usage in the Quran. Because the Quran didn't mention it as a rule. It was just mentioning it as language. So language customary will take precedence. Right? Last example is kind of a funny example. So let's say someone is leasing a property, renting a property from you, and they say, or to you. They say, I'm going to rent you my house. And they say, yeah, but I want to make sure that when I'm renting the house from you, I want to make sure that I have 100% privacy. I don't even want you to step foot near the house. Don't step foot on my property, while I'm renting it from you. And he says, okay, I promise not to step foot on your property. And then he goes and he takes a bicycle and starts riding around your property. I didn't step foot on your property. So the thing is, in custom, obviously, step foot or take a foot or take a step in your foot, or setting foot in your property means not entering it at all, in any way, in any shape, whether you're hovering over, what do you call it, a hoverboard, over the, property or whatever it is. No one knows what a hoverboard is, do they? Yeah, okay, so some people have actually seen Back to the Future, that's good. That's a cool concept. Anyways, so what is the basis for this? The Quran has left certain things to custom. So there's proof from the Quran, but it left certain things for people to determine through custom. So take an example, when it talks about maintenance for a wife after divorce, how much maintenance should you give her? It's been left to custom. So Allah says in the Quran, a wealthy man must spend from his wealth, and whoever's provision is restricted, let him spend from what Allah has given him. So the wealthy person should spend from their wealth. How much are they supposed to spend? And what's the definition of a wealthy person? How do you define a wealthy person? It's so relative, right? It depends on the culture. It really depends on the culture. There are people who, they have hundreds of $1,000s in the bank and they think that they're poor. Like, how am I going to survive, the next day or something? So the thing, in fact, I had someone just call me regarding this today, actually. So it's dependent on culture. Okay. Likewise, in the case of divorce, Allah said, upon the father is the mother's provision and their clothing according to what is customary. So actually the Quran used the word, you determine this rule according to your custom, according to what's generally going to be applied. Right? So in the verse specifically mentioned custom, which gives you kind of a setup that custom plays a major role in determining certain things in Islam. Okay? But there are certain conditions that have to be observed to prevent custom from playing a greater role than it deserves to be played and from being abused. So here are certain conditions. So condition number 1, the custom must be commonly practiced and it must be recurrent. Meaning it must be a custom of it like the entire locality. It can't be a little tiny group of people. Like a lot of people say, hey, well, it's not wrong to curse, right? Because we use the F word, we use this. Among my group of friends, we understand each other. We're not really cussing. We're just using these words. We use the words all the time, but we understand that we're not cussing. Your little group doesn't define what the custom is actually going to be. Why don't you go and decide, you're going to run for public office and then use those words. And you'll determine whether or not that's the custom of your area or it's not the custom of your area. So that's the easy way to figure it out. So it must be commonly practiced and it must be recurrent. Meaning not one time this one group of people did this. right? It has to be something that's happening on a regular basis. That's the definition of custom. So it can't be an individual, it can't be a specific group of people only. So let's take an example. When you're buying a house or you're buying a car, usually the keys are going to be included in the sale price, right? Generally you're going to get it, right? But let's say there's a village that does not have this custom. There's a little small group of people, they don't have the custom, and someone comes from the city, goes to the village, makes a transaction, buys a car, and then all of a sudden you pay the money and everything. The guy says, okay, thank you very much, can I have the keys so I can drive the car? Oh, the keys? Oh, these keys cost $10,000. You don't know. The car was $10,000 and the keys are $10,000. Keys don't come with the car. So you have to pay another $10,000 if you want the keys. You say, well, what the heck is this? Right? But this is the custom right here. We're in the village over here. You can ask anybody. So you can't enforce that upon someone else who's not part of that custom. Right? So you have to be cautious. Huh? Cannot. You should not enforce it upon them unless, you're traveling to like another country that's an established large custom. Then, of course, it's your problem. So like if you're an American, right, and you're going to Singapore, right, and you say, well, I'm going to spray paint up the place, and then they decide, hey, we caught you, we're going to cane you, we pull down your pants and cane you, like what happened. You guys know the incident, right? It's actually happened. And the Americans like, hey, they don't do this in America, you can't do this to us. Well, our custom is, you mess with our property, you spray paint over here, right? You're going to get caned, right? That's what you get. So, the caning was for the spray paint, actually. The chewing gum is prohibited in Singapore as well, though.
Yeah, that's what happened in America.
You got fined for it, you mean?
I think they
Yeah. So yeah, chewing gum is, for example, you're not allowed to spit it on the floor or something. It's a big fine for it. Singapore is a very clean place, cool place. So let's see. Okay, so let's say there's a dispute. You're trying to determine, well, what is the custom in this area? Is the custom this or is the custom that? So what do? You go back to the experts. So let's say there's a dispute about cars or there's a dispute about houses. You go back to car dealers and you say, what's the general practice in this profession? You go back to real estate agents and you ask them, hey, what is the general practice here in the industry? What is the custom? So you can determine what the custom is. Another example, let's say there's a country that accepts two forms of currency. Like, for example, they accept the euro, they accept the pound. Two types of currency in the same region. Let's say it's very commonplace. So now, you make a transaction, you say, I'm selling this for $10. Now the bucks could mean euro, bucks could mean the pound. So which currency is it? So you go back to the custom and say, well, what is the default currency that's going to be used in the average transaction? It's going to take place. Someone says, hey, well, I meant 10 euros. I didn't mean 10 pounds. So, well, you know what? The standard is pounds, for example, in this region. You have to go with the standard. So that's number one. Number two, the custom, this is pretty obvious. The custom must be in existence when the event occurred. So you cannot apply it retroactively. So for example, if someone, if it used to be the custom that you shake hands to conclude the sale, and then a few months later the custom changed, no one shakes hands anymore, right? For whatever reason, the custom has changed. You can't say, well, oh, you know what? That handshake that we did, that transaction was not valid because the handshake doesn't apply. If it was applying at that time, it's going to still apply at this time. That's number two. Number three, and this is very important actually, number three, it cannot contradict a stipulation in the contract. So when you specify in the contract something clearly and everyone agrees and both parties agree upon it, custom does not play any role anymore. And that's why when you write a contract, you want to make it as detailed as possible so you can override any type of misunderstanding or ambiguity that exists, and that's how lawyers make their money, right? They get $500 an hour to go and write every single detail so that no one can come and say, oh, well, this is custom or this is the way it should be or whatever. So if you make a contract and you put a stipulation to override the custom, it takes precedence. No one can come and say, well, this is the way we do things. So I'll give you an example. Someone is getting married, right? And in the marriage contract, they write that the dowry we're agreeing upon has to be paid immediately, right? Or has to be paid within 1 month. And then the marriage takes place, and the family of the guy is saying, oh, no, you don't understand. In our custom, in our culture, right, we pay after several years, So, this is the way we do things, so you should not insist because custom takes precedence. Say no. When there's a stipulation in the contract, you write it down, it takes precedence over custom. So if you want that, and you want to not be tricked by all the cultural, happens in a lot of families. In our culture, this happened. And in our culture, or in the culture over here, you stipulate everything, write it down, it overrules what culture may be there in the first place. Okay? Like for example, if you write in the contract, I'm selling you a car, and there's no keys to the car. And they sign the contract, they say, well, it's obvious you have to provide the keys. No, you should have read the contract. Right, like this, when you're installing software or signing up for iTunes or something, you should probably read at least part of the contract before clicking, your life away or whatever else you're clicking, right? So the thing is, everything should be there in the contract. Like Facebook, right? Who actually reads a Facebook contract? Very few people. What they don't realize is that when you post something on Facebook and then you delete it, it's not deleted. It stays on Facebook servers, and they can use that anytime they want to at their own discretion. Let's say 30 years later, you're about to run for president, you posted something really foolish of yourself, they can sell that to the highest bidder technically, right, if that's in their contract. So, the contract overrides anyways. So you could technically sell a broken thing if it's in the contract. You could sell a house without keys. You could sell a car without keys. You could do all of these things. Right, if the person agrees to it, as long as it's not prohibited in Islam. Okay? And number 4, and this is, it should be obvious, but it's not obvious to, unfortunately, the vast majority of the world's Muslims living today, is that custom cannot violate a clear rule in Islamic law. Okay? When culture conflicts with Islam, Islam is supposed to take precedence. So for example, if the custom of the land says that the woman is supposed to pay the mahar or the dowry to the man, right, they say, well, that's the way we do things over here. That is contradictory to what Islamic law teaches, and therefore that's completely invalid. It doesn't matter what the custom is. So here's a bunch of other examples, which are quite common. Paying the dowry to the bride's family, instead of paying it to the bride herself directly, is against Islam. Therefore, even if it's the custom does not apply. Not observing proper Islamic dress in front of cousins and in front of relatives who you can actually marry, they're not mahrams, or hugging them, for example, is prohibited in Islamic law. But people try to justify it through custom, it's not allowed. Number 3, not observing proper Islamic dress on the days of Eid or on someone's own wedding day. For some reason, people just all of a sudden think that, well, it's custom. Everyone relaxes, the Islamic regulations on these days. So that's what everyone else is doing. Doesn't matter. D, denying inheritance to females in the family. This can be very common in some Muslim communities. It's not allowed. And also, distributing all of the inheritance to the spouse and denying the other family members a share of inheritance may be custom in a society, but it's against Islamic law because Allah has specified distribution of inheritance. Okay? Can you hold the question? So just hold it till the end, inshallah. Let's see, how much do we have? So what we'll do, actually, I'll take your question now and then we'll break.
commodities or different money that the buyer family has to pay so that would in that case be haram, or would that still be okay because the dowry is something separate from.
Okay, so in Pakistan there's this gifts that the bride's family has to give to the husband, to the man's family. When you say has to, right, the marriage won't take place otherwise? Huh? It's commanded? It's absolutely necessary? Yeah.
Make
So-
that upfront.
Otherwise, you can't get married, pretty much. It's not going to happen. Yeah.
It depends on the family.
It depends on the family. So the thing is, I mean, this cannot be made a reason to not get married. If it is, then it's against Islam. If it's a custom that this is the way we do things and you're expected to give gift here and you're expected to give a gift back or something like that, that's a custom, you can do that. But once you start thinking that, this is a requirement and we're not going to proceed the marriage without it, then it's wrong. Then it's wrong. Okay? So, we'll take a break here, inshallah. We'll take a 10-minute break and we'll come back, inshallah, after the break. Assalamu alaikum. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So before we resume with the class, a few announcements. So our registration for next quarter is up on the website already. Yes, alhamdulillah, time flies, right? So the date for what's the date for the new quarter? April 15th is the first day of class, which should be a Tuesday. So on Tuesday, we have Quran 2, which is going to be introduction, I forgot what the class is titled, but it's basically the sciences of the Quran. So it's going to talk about the history of the Quran, how it's been documented, how it's been preserved, how you interpret the Quran, different ways of tafsir, different books of tafsir, all of that stuff. Inshallah, that class will be on Tuesday. And on Thursday, we're going to have Arabic 2. So if you've taken Arabic 1, it's Arabic 2. And on Sunday, we're going to be repeating Islamic Law 1, which some of you have already taken. And if you want to join us for Islamic Law 1, again, we're probably going to add in Hajj this time. Because the 10th week of class, if you remember from last time, in a year now, but if you remember, there was no 10th week of class. So technically, if we can finish all the material again, it's going to be a little bit different, but we'll throw Hajj in there, probably. Jazakumullah khair. What's that? Yeah, you can just come for that week if you want. Inshallah. Yeah, one day, inshallah. If you've taken Islamic Law 1 already. Inshallah, yes.
Besides the Arabic too, is there a prerequisite for that Quran too?
It's a recommended prerequisite is Quran 1.
Was that the people?
No, Quran 1 was the stories of the prophets. Yes. Okay. So any questions about new classes?
When are you going to do the finance one?
Finance we'll see, inshallah. Once we establish our bank, and we can promote the bank, and inshallah. So it's in the works. I have a meeting tomorrow about finance, and then again on Saturday about finance. So we'll probably finalize it soon. Yeah.
Are you serious about it?
Yeah, I'm totally serious. We actually came up with a model. So we looked at like 9 different models. We saw that 7 out of 9 were like shady models, like the selling the bottle of water models. So we're coming up with the 9th model. It's like almost perfect model for people who want to invest and for people who want to buy a house. It's a really, really awesome model. So inshallah, hopefully, we're going to start on a very, very small scale, obviously, but we're going to try to work something out. No interest. There's no, zero interest involved.
Can you repeat the second part of that model? Second part of the equation?
The model?
First he says buy for $9, pay you 10 later. What was the second part?
You buy it back.
So
On
the
cash.
person who sold it,
Yeah.
bought it back for $9.
On cash.
So he's still expecting the $10 in.
Mm-hmm.
He pays $9, he pays $9. But the guy is still
Actually, he's loaning him $9.
Yeah, that's what it amounts to.
Yeah, because he has the use of the $9 per month.
Exactly.
And pays back.
Exactly.
It wasn't clear when you said it.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah. Okay. So, any questions on the new classes? No questions? Okay. Since these are all level 2 classes now, so is everyone ready to read like more than one book? Inshallah. For the class, 2-3 books, inshallah?
For this class?
No, for the new classes.
Oh.
No, I'm thinking of writing one and then assigning you 2 others for research. Work? Yes? Good. I got one head nod, so that's fine, inshallah. So go ahead, that's sufficient, inshallah.
I don't know.
So I taught a master's class on it, and we had 4 books. So I think 3 books should be sufficient for you, right? No?
Yeah, we should read.
should read. There needs to be more reading, right? Yeah. Yeah. A proper essay. Like 20,000 words or something like that, inshallah. Yeah. I know we should. The thing is, I want to teach an essay writing workshop before we do that. Otherwise, I'm going to get essays that are just all over the place. I know from my master's students, essays all over the place because they don't know how to write an essay properly. So once we set up a essay writing workshop, we should have essays, inshallah, which is actually part of one of the classes. It's part of the last class, actually, the skills class. So let me see if we can figure out a way to put some essays in there or something. Yeah.
If you have a class that with officially one book, two other assignments,
Yeah.
will you be liable for reading?
Reading the other ones?
I mean, when you get the quizzes.
Yes, you'll be liable. See, in the first year, we actually had recommended reading books, which almost nobody read. Right? Literally, did anyone read any one of those books? Really? Which one? No, that was the required book. That was technically a required book. In Islamic law, did anyone read the book, the recommended reading? In Life of the Prophet, did anyone read the recommended 2 books? Huh? There was no. It was Adil Salahi and Tariq al-Mawan. Okay.
It was very wordy.
Very wordy. You didn't read Adil Salahi then. 800 pages. Okay. Khair, inshallah. Tariq al-Mawan is coming this Saturday. So you could tell him that his book was very wordy. You got an appointment with him to tell him? Good. That's good. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, it should be done. Like hadith, we were starting a project. So yeah, inshallah, I'll try and figure out some group project or something like that. But we should make this, no one requested to study in the library. Someone said that they were going to request, but they didn't request. We want to make this. They did request? Oh, did we give them the library? Oh, really? I had no idea. Oh, mashallah. Okay, great. Alhamdulillah. Okay, so things are picking up then. So. Inshallah, if more people request that, we can do that too, inshallah. So yeah, I just visited Bayna this weekend, alhamdulillah. Really awesome, building. It's so nice, mashallah. It's well designed. It's like perfect for a small little college. So we should eventually aim for something like that. Little different rooms and nicely painted and everything. Bayna, it's a Bayna Institute in Dallas. Yeah, so it's very nice, alhamdulillah. Okay, moving back to application. Alright, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So application of urf or custom has been applied historically in so many different ways. Usually the way that it's applied, it opens the door to istihsan, which is juridical preference. But here are some examples. Right? So scholars have said that if you have a public bath, and we're not talking about the naked public baths, public baths became popular in Muslim communities or Muslim areas. What's the problem with the public bath? So a public bath is basically, there's all this heated water and the salts and everything, and you go in and you pay a fee to go in, and you get to, it's like a spa, right? You go and use the spa today and you do all of these things. But the thing is, at that time, you don't know what the consumption of water is going to be. So one customer is going to come in and use X gallons of water, and another customer is going to use Y gallons of water. And we learned in Islamic law too, that the principle when you're making a transaction, when you're selling something, the item needs to be specified clearly. There should be no uncertainty in the transaction. So technically, a public bath would be something which would be prohibited because you're selling something which is uncertain, and you're buying something which is uncertain. You can use 10 gallons of water, you can use 50 gallons of water, you can use 100 gallons of water. But because this was something which was a custom, right, it actually opened the door to juridical preference. So they used hidden analogy to look at this transaction and say, hey, not only is it custom, but there's a way to realize that this is not violating an intrinsic principle because everyone is doing this and you're buying the pass to use X amount of water or something like that. So it's not considered something that's unspecified. And likewise, a modern analogy would be all-you-can-eat meals. Right? So $8, all you can eat. Now there's one guy who will eat like $3 worth, another guy will eat like $55 worth. So it's uncertain transaction technically, but it's allowed due to custom. So if you own a restaurant and you're offering that, you're okay, inshallah. Number 2, we already saw the istisna contract, the contract of manufacturing, which was essentially supposed to be prohibited because it's selling something which, does anyone remember this contract? Something which doesn't exist, and like clothing and stitching and all of that. So one of the principles it violates is something doesn't in existence yet. And number 2, there's more violations. Right? Something which is not it's not clearly specified in the sense that it's not made yet. Right? It violates a few principles. So we talked about that already, but that was custom. That was customary in all societies. When you get clothes made from scratch and the person doesn't even own the cloth or the material, this is something which opened up the door for istihsan or juridical preference to validate this transaction. Another example is mahr or dowry. So in the event of marriage, Islam originally says that mahr, the default is dowry is paid immediately. So when you get married, you have to pay the dowry or the mahr on the spot. Now the thing is, it was a custom among some people that they used to give a deferred dowry later on. But Islam never prescribed that in the first place. So is it allowed to use custom to initiate this type of transaction? Yes. So what they did was, since it's not violating the transaction itself, you're allowed to say, I'm going to give some deferred dowry, and the deferred dowry becomes like a debt on the person. Right? Because you're allowed to defer a price on an object, therefore you should be allowed to defer your dowry, but now it's like a loan. So you owe money on the loan. Okay? And if your wife wants a collateral or something like that, she can ask for collateral. Your car is collateral or whatever it is, right? So she can do something like that. So this was allowed. Let's see, what else? Another example is that Imam Abu Hanifa, he forbade charging money for teaching the Quran. It's prohibited completely. You're not allowed to take money for teaching the Quran or teaching the principles of the faith, the essential basic, iman. You're not allowed to charge money for it. And the reason why is because he considered it to be a direct act of worship, like prayer. It is like a specific act of worship. You cannot charge money for this. You can charge money for teaching Arabic. You can charge money for teaching any other subject, but not these two things. Now, this was suitable maybe for the custom in which he lived. But then his students later on came, and his followers later on, they overruled this verdict of his, and they said, look, the custom has changed now. There's a short supply of teachers, and there's a huge demand of students, and if people are going to be working the whole time, and they're not able to, make their living, then they're going to spend so much time working and being in the marketplace or doing whatever, they won't have enough time to teach. And now we have a short supply of teachers. So they overturned that ruling, and that pretty much exists until this day. So this is custom. Okay, any questions on custom? Pretty clear? Good. Alright, moving on then. Presumption of continuity, istishab, or istishab al-hal. Right? Presumption of continuity is another method where basically in Islamic law you presume that something remains the way it was when there's a lack of evidence that the thing has actually changed. Okay? So what that means is, I'll give you an example. Example is, you go and you buy a hunting dog. A dog which is supposed to be trained to hunt. Alright, and then when you bring the dog home, you're gonna go and, you try and, you go out in the forest, you're like, okay dog, get that bird. And the dog like just doesn't move. It's not doing anything, it's not responding to anything, the dog just plays around. So the thing is, So, so Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik says they cannot be given any new rights, which means that if the brother dies, for example, this person cannot inherit while he's a missing person. So we're not saying he's alive, we're not saying he's dead, but he's not allowed to have a new right which he cannot inherit. If someone says, I would like to give a gift to all my friends, and he was one of the close friends, he cannot receive a gift. I know he's not there, but you cannot even put it as part of his property. He's not allowed to take on new rights. Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad says, yes, he may take on new gifts, because they believe that when a person is in this state, their presumption of continuity states that they were alive, right? So Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad says, presumption of continuity has the power to prove that he's alive. And Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik says, it doesn't prove anything, but it disproves the claim that he's dead. So it acts as a negating factor, not as an affirming factor. And the other group of scholars says, it acts as an affirming and a negating factor. That's the difference. So I'm not going to ask you all these details, or maybe I will, but it's good to know, at least one example. There is a time. There is a time. There's a difference on the time, though. Difference of opinion on the time. A movie about is this Castaway or something like that? Okay. I'm good. Okay, you had a question? Oh. Where'd it go? Okay, it's done anyways. We're done. So, any questions?
If the person they purposely
If they purposely disappear, but you can't tell, right? So if they're, you wouldn't know. So if they ran away and you know that they ran away, then they're a live person, so they can inherit and everything. This is when no one knows where the person is. And you can't prove, I mean, what's going to happen if they show up 4 years from now? You give away all their property and everything. This, I was captured. I was imprisoned by, some enemy or something like that. Someone captured me, and now all of a sudden I'm back, and now what? It's a problem. Oh yeah, well, kids moved on, wife moved on, all your property's gone or something like that. So this is a very tricky issue on how to deal with this. This just shows you how presumption of continuity was applied in different ways. Yeah.
This question I was going to do it. Had a question. I missed it, so the name of word applies.
If it's relevant to this, okay.
You touched about application of continuity. Like for example, you wake up with Fajr and you're uncertain whether you meant to or not. What if you go through the process, you finish your prayer, then you start doubting? Did I have wudu? But you already did your prayer.
Even after you finish your prayer, if you start doubting that you have wudu, the doubt, you remove it.
You have to remove
No. The doubt doesn't establish anything. You throw the doubt away and you keep your prayer. If you become 100% sure, you remember, you know what, now I'm 100% sure, I totally remember what happened. I didn't have wudu, then you repray. Yes.
Like when you use the term runaway, is that only applies to people kidnapped, or because it's more common with the female community that is premeditated runaway?
No, it's only applying to people who are missing and no one knows where they are. The government doesn't know where they are, their family doesn't know where they are. No. Okay. That's it. Alright. The test? No, after, privately, inshallah. Alright, inshallah, subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik, nastaghfiruka Allah wa natubu ilayk. Don't forget to register, inshallah, for class. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
You have a date when the classes will start?
April 15th.